She saved him in the snow, but lost him in her arms, the Apache woman's last fight for the cowboy. Snow fell without sound, covering the mountains in a thick white blanket that erased every path and every sign of life. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the wind moved across the land like a restless spirit. Anyone who knew these mountains understood that storms like this did not forgive mistakes. The cold crept into bones, and the snow hid dangers beneath its quiet beauty. The cowboy had ridden into the mountains that morning, believing he had enough time to return before nightfall. He was not a careless man. Years of working alone had taught him to respect nature and watch the sky for warning signs. But storms in winter did not always follow rules. What began as light snowfall had grown into something stronger, something heavier, until the world around him became a blur of white. His horse moved carefully along a narrow ridge, its breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The cowboy kept his eyes forward, searching for familiar landmarks, but everything looked different beneath fresh snow. Trees that once marked the trail now appeared as dark shapes against endless white. The wind grew stronger, pushing against him, tugging at his coat, and making his eyes water. He spoke softly to the horse, more out of habit than need. The animal trusted his voice, and he trusted the animal's instincts. Together they had crossed difficult terrain before, but as the storm deepened, the ground became unpredictable. Ice formed beneath the snow, hidden and dangerous. The accident happened quickly. One moment the horse stepped forward, the next its front legs slipped on an icy patch. The animal struggled to regain balance, but the narrow ridge left little room for recovery. The cowboy tried to steady himself, pulling on the reins, shifting his weight, but the ground gave way beneath them. He fell hard against the frozen earth. Pain shot through his side and shoulder. The horse scrambled back to its feet and ran, frightened by the sudden fall and the roaring wind. Within seconds it disappeared into the storm, leaving the man alone. For a long moment he did not move. Snow fell onto his coat and hat, slowly covering him. He tried to breathe through the pain, forcing himself to stay calm. Panic would not help him now. He had survived difficult situations before. He only needed to think clearly. He pushed himself up, but dizziness hit him immediately. The world spun, and he dropped back onto one knee. The cold seeped through his gloves as he pressed his hand against the ground. He tested his legs and felt strength there, though every movement hurt. His shoulder burned with sharp pain, and breathing felt heavy, as if something inside him had shifted. He looked around, searching for the trail, but the storm had erased it. Snow fell faster now, blurring the horizon. The mountains had turned into a maze without direction. He knew he could not stay where he was. Sitting still meant freezing. Step by step he began to walk, leaning slightly to one side to ease the pain. The wind pushed against him, forcing him to lower his head. He moved slowly, choosing what he hoped was the safest direction downhill. Trees appeared and disappeared through the snowfall, their branches bending under the weight of ice. Time passed without measure. The cold numbed his hands and feet, turning movement into effort. He tried to keep his mind focused by counting steps, but the numbers faded as exhaustion grew stronger. Memories surfaced without warning. Quiet mornings on the ranch, long rides across open land, moments of silence that once felt peaceful, but now felt distant. He stumbled more often. Each fall made it harder to stand again. The world seemed quieter, almost too quiet, as if the storm swallowed all sound. He knew this feeling was dangerous. Sleep tempted him, whispering that resting for just a moment would make everything easier. He forced himself forward, but eventually his body refused. His legs trembled and gave out, sending him down into the snow. He tried to rise again, but the strength he needed was gone. The cold wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. His thoughts slowed, drifting between awareness and dreams. Far away, another traveler moved through the storm. The Apache woman had left her village days earlier, traveling alone as she often did. She understood the language of the land, the way clouds gathered, the way wind shifted, the way animals moved before weather changed. When the storm began, she sought shelter beneath a line of rocks, waiting patiently while the worst of the wind passed. But something felt wrong. The storm carried a strange stillness that made her uneasy. When she stepped back onto the trail, she noticed tracks that did not belong to wildlife. Horse tracks. Fresh ones. They moved toward the mountains instead of away from them. She paused, studying the marks in the snow. Few travelers would choose this direction during winter storms. She followed the tracks slowly, her eyes sharp and her movements careful. The snow tried to erase the path, but she knew how to read even the faintest signs. The wind carried the scent of cold and pine, and beneath it she sensed urgency. After some distance, she saw where the horse had slipped. Broken snow marked the ground, and deeper impressions showed where someone had fallen. She knelt, touching the surface lightly, feeling the story hidden beneath it. The marks were fresh. Someone had been here recently. She looked ahead and noticed faint shapes leading away, uneven footprints spaced irregularly. Whoever made them was injured. For a moment she hesitated. The storm was dangerous, and searching for a stranger could risk her own life. Survival often meant choosing carefully when to help and when to walk away. But something in the tracks pulled at her. She had seen too many storms claim lives without witness. She stood and continued forward. The wind grew colder, biting at her face, but she moved steadily, following the signs left behind. Finally, through the falling snow, she saw a dark shape on the ground. The cowboy lay half covered by snow, his body still except for shallow breathing. His hat had fallen beside him, and ice formed along the edge of his coat. For a moment she simply watched, listening to the storm and to his breathing, measuring whether he still had strength left. She knelt beside him and brushed snow away from his face. His skin felt cold but not yet lifeless. Relief moved through her. He could still be saved. He opened his eyes slightly, unfocused, as if unsure whether she was real. Words formed but did not leave his lips. She spoke softly, her voice calm and steady, telling him he needed to stay awake. The wind howled around them, reminding her the time was short. She knew she could not leave him here. Alone, he would not survive another hour. The decision formed without hesitation. She gathered her strength, lifting him slowly, supporting his weight against her shoulder. The path ahead would be long and dangerous, but she moved forward anyway, step by step through the storm, carrying both the burden of another life and the quiet determination that sometimes strangers became connected by fate in the most unexpected moments. The wind followed them like a shadow as she guided him through the snow. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she did not slow down. She adjusted his arm over her shoulder and leaned slightly forward, letting her body take most of his weight. He tried to walk, but his legs dragged behind, barely responding to his effort. His breath came in uneven bursts, and sometimes he whispered words she could not understand. She watched the sky carefully, measuring the storm's rhythm. The snowfall had softened slightly, but the cold remained sharp and unforgiving. She needed shelter soon. She remembered an old place used by travelers long ago, a small stone structure hidden between rocks, built to survive harsh winters. If it still stood, it might give them a chance. Her steps followed memory more than sight. Snow covered everything, turning familiar paths into blank pages. Still she moved with quiet confidence, trusting the land she knew well. The cowboy stumbled again, and she tightened her grip, whispering to him to stay awake. His head dropped forward, and she gently lifted his chin so he would not fall. Finally, through the curtain of snow, she saw dark shapes rising from the ground. Large rocks formed a natural barrier against the wind, and behind them stood the small shelter. Relief passed through her like warmth. She quickened her pace, guiding him toward the entrance. The door resisted at first, frozen at the edges, but she pushed firmly until it opened with a low sound. Inside, the air was still and cold but protected from the storm. She helped him sit against the wall and immediately began working. The room was simple. Old stone walls, a small fireplace, and a pile of dry wood left by someone long ago. She knelt near the fire pit and struck a spark carefully, shielding it from the cold air. After a few moments, flames began to grow, casting soft orange light that pushed away the gray shadows. She returned to him quickly. His eyes were half closed, and his breathing sounded shallow. She removed his wet gloves and rubbed his hands gently to bring back warmth. Snow melted slowly from his coat as the fire strengthened. He opened his eyes again, looking at her as if trying to understand where he was. Confusion moved across his face, but when he saw the fire, some tension left his body. "You're safe," she said softly, her voice steady. He tried to speak but only managed a weak nod. Exhaustion pulled him towards sleep again, but she kept him awake by asking simple questions. His name, where he came from, how long he had been riding. His answers came slowly, broken by pauses, yet each word told her he was still fighting. Once the fire grew strong, she prepared warm water and helped him drink small sips. Color slowly returned to his face. She carefully examined his injuries, noticing swelling along his side and stiffness in his shoulder. She worked with calm focus, using cloth and herbs she carried to reduce pain and protect against cold. Hours passed quietly. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the shelter the firelight created a different world. Shadows moved gently along the walls, and the crackling of burning wood replaced the sound of wind. He watched her as she worked. Though weak, his gaze followed her movements with quiet curiosity. She moved with confidence, every action precise and thoughtful. There was no panic in her, only steady determination. "Why help me?" he asked finally, his voice rough. She paused for a moment, considering the question. "Because you needed help," she replied simply. He seemed surprised by the answer, as if expecting something more complicated. He nodded slowly, accepting her words. Night deepened. She added more wood to the fire and prepared a small meal, encouraging him to eat slowly. Each bite gave him more strength, though he tired quickly. When he began to drift into sleep again, she allowed it this time, knowing rest was necessary now that warmth surrounded him. She remained awake, sitting near the fire, listening to his breathing. The storm outside faded and returned in waves, but she trusted the shelter to protect them. Her thoughts moved quietly through memories of her own journeys, times she had traveled alone, times she had helped strangers and been helped in return. Life had taught her that paths crossed for reasons not always clear at first. Morning arrived slowly, marked by softer light filtering through small cracks in the stone walls. The storm had weakened, but had not fully ended. She checked his condition carefully. His fever had lowered slightly, and his breathing sounded stronger. When he woke, his eyes were clearer. He looked around the shelter with curiosity and gratitude. Sitting up caused him pain, but he forced a small smile. "You carried me here?" he asked. She nodded. He shook his head slightly, impressed and humbled. "I owe you my life." She said nothing, simply offering him more water. Gratitude did not need many words. As the day continued, they began to talk more. At first, the conversation stayed simple. Where they had traveled, what work they did, stories about weather and animals. Slowly, deeper topics appeared. He spoke about long years working on a ranch, about choosing solitude after losing people important to him. She listened without interrupting, her quiet presence encouraging honesty. In return, she shared small pieces of her own story, her connection to the mountains, her respect for tradition, and the freedom she found in traveling alone. She did not speak of everything, only what felt right in the moment. Trust grew naturally between them. There was no rush, no pressure. The shared experience of survival created a bond stronger than introductions or names. He tried to stand later that day, determined not to be a burden, but pain forced him back down. She gently insisted he rest longer, explaining that rushing recovery could make injuries worse. He listened, though frustration crossed his face. Outside, snow continued to fall lightly, covering old tracks and creating a peaceful silence. Inside, warmth and steady breathing filled the shelter. As evening approached again, they shared another meal and watched the fire together. The flickering light reflected in their eyes, revealing emotions neither fully expressed yet. Relief, gratitude, and a quiet connection forming beneath the surface. He realized he no longer felt alone. For the first time in a long while, someone sat beside him, not out of obligation but choice. She, in turn, noticed how his presence changed the silence, making it feel less empty. Night returned gently this time, without the harsh roar of earlier hours. The storm was fading, leaving behind calm skies waiting beyond the clouds. Before sleeping, he looked at her and said softly, "You didn't have to stay." She met his gaze with calm certainty. I chose to feel the words settled between them like a promise, simple yet powerful. Outside, the last of the wind moved across the mountains, while inside the shelter 2 lives slowly began to intertwine, shaped by kindness and the quiet strength found in helping another person when the world feels cold and endless. Morning came slowly, as if the world itself was tired after the storm. Soft light filtered through the small gaps in the stone walls, touching the edges of the shelter with pale warmth. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving glowing embers that flickered gently. The woman rose quietly before he woke, moving with calm purpose. She added more wood to the fire and stepped outside to study the sky. The air felt different now. The storm had moved on, leaving behind deep snow and a quiet stillness. Fresh tracks from animals crossed the white ground, showing that life continued even after harsh weather. She breathed in deeply, feeling relief, but also knowing that survival still required patience and careful choices. When she returned inside, he was awake, watching the flames with thoughtful eyes. He looked stronger than before, though fatigue still rested on his face. "You're up early," he said softly. She nodded. "The storm is ending. That is good." He tried to sit up straighter, and though pain crossed his expression, he managed better than the day before. Small progress filled him with hope. She handed him warm water, and he drank slowly, grateful for the simple comfort. The day unfolded with quiet rhythm. She encouraged him to move gently, helping him stand and take a few careful steps around the shelter. Each movement was slow, but he refused to give up. Determination filled him, not only because he wanted to recover, but because he did not want to disappoint the person who had fought so hard to save him. As the hours passed, they spoke more freely. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. Instead, it felt peaceful. He told her about long rides across open land, about evenings spent watching sunsets alone, and about the way loneliness could feel both heavy and familiar at the same time. She listened carefully, sometimes smiling, sometimes asking quiet questions that encouraged him to share more. In return, she spoke about the lessons she learned from her elders, how to listen to nature, how to respect every living thing, and how strength often came from patience rather than force. Outside, the sun began to appear between clouds, turning the snow into a bright field of light. He watched through the doorway, amazed at how beautiful the world looked after surviving something so dangerous. Later, she suggested they step outside for a short time. He hesitated, unsure if he was ready, but agreed. Leaning lightly on a walking stick she had shaped from a strong branch, he moved slowly into the open air. The cold touched his face gently, no longer harsh like before. The mountains stretched endlessly around them, silent and powerful. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing deeply, feeling alive in a way he had almost forgotten. "You saved me," he said again, his voice filled with quiet wonder. She shook her head slightly. "You chose to keep fighting. I only helped." They walked a short distance together, her steps matching his pace. Each movement built his strength little by little. When he grew tired, they returned to the shelter, where warmth welcomed them again. As days passed, their routine grew stronger. They gathered firewood together, prepared meals, and spoke about small things that slowly revealed deeper truths. Laughter appeared occasionally, surprising both of them. It felt natural, like something they had known for years rather than days. He began to notice how she moved through the world with calm confidence. She never wasted energy, never rushed without reason. Watching her made him rethink many parts of his own life. He had always believed strength meant handling everything alone, but now he wondered if true strength also meant allowing others to stand beside you. One afternoon, while they sat near the fire, he asked gently, "Do you always travel alone?" She paused, considering her answer. "Sometimes people come and go. The land stays." He nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected. "I used to think being alone made things easier, less pain that way." "And now?" she asked. He looked at the fire for a long moment before replying. "Now I'm not sure." Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection growing stronger each day. Despite his improving condition, she noticed small signs that worried her. Sometimes his breathing grew shallow after simple movements. Other times he pressed his hand against his side, as if trying to hide discomfort. When she asked, he dismissed it as normal pain from the fall. Still, her instincts told her to remain cautious. One evening they prepared food together. He insisted on helping, wanting to contribute rather than simply receive care. She allowed it, watching closely to ensure he did not push himself too far. The shared task created a sense of partnership that felt meaningful to both of them. As they ate, he spoke about dreams he once had, building a life that felt more than survival, finding someone to share quiet moments with. He laughed softly at himself, saying he had stopped believing such things were possible long ago. She listened without interrupting. "Sometimes," she said gently, "life changes when we least expect it." He looked at her with curiosity, sensing deeper meaning in her words. For a moment neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, filling the space between them. Later that night he stepped outside alone for a moment, gazing at the stars that now shone clearly across the sky. The storm felt like a distant memory, yet its impact remained strong within him. He realized that being saved had given him more than another chance at life. It had given him a chance to see life differently. She joined him quietly, standing beside him without speaking. The silence felt comfortable, filled with understanding rather than emptiness. "You changed everything," he said softly, still looking at the sky. She did not answer immediately. Finally she said, "Sometimes two paths cross for a reason, even if we do not understand it yet." He nodded slowly, feeling peace settle within him. Inside the shelter, the fire continued to burn steadily, symbolizing the warmth growing between them. Neither rushed to define what they felt. The bond formed naturally, shaped by shared struggle and mutual respect. But beneath the calm moments, unseen challenges waited. His injuries were healing on the surface, yet deeper damage remained hidden, slowly shaping the path ahead. For now, though, they focused on the present, on surviving together, learning from each other, and finding comfort in a connection that felt rare and genuine. The mountains stood silent around them, holding their story within endless snow and open sky, while two lives continued to move closer, bound not by promises spoken aloud, but by the quiet strength of companionship born in the heart of a storm. The morning felt different from the ones before. The sky had cleared completely, and sunlight rested softly on the snow, making the mountains shine like glass. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a quiet world that looked peaceful, but still held danger beneath its beauty. Inside the shelter, the cowboy sat near the fire, staring into the flames. His strength had returned slowly over the past days, and he could now stand and walk short distances without too much help. Still, a deep tiredness followed him. One he tried to hide. The woman noticed it immediately. She had watched people recover before, and she knew when something was not right. She prepared food while keeping her eyes on him. He smiled when he caught her looking. "I'm stronger today," he said, as if trying to convince both of them. She nodded gently, but her expression remained thoughtful. "You are stronger," she agreed, "but your body still needs care." He leaned back slightly, taking a deep breath. For a moment, a sharp discomfort crossed his face, but it disappeared quickly. He hoped she had not noticed. He did not want her to worry more than she already did. After eating, she stepped outside and studied the path toward the distant town. The weather was clear enough for travel, and she knew they could not stay in the shelter forever. Supplies would not last, and he needed proper medical care. Her decision formed slowly but firmly. When she returned inside, she sat across from him. "We should leave soon," she said calmly. "The town is not too far if we move slowly." He looked at her surprised, but also relieved. Part of him had begun to fear that he might never leave the mountains again. "I can walk," he said quickly. "I know," she replied, offering a small smile, "but we will go at a careful pace." They spent the rest of the morning preparing. She packed their supplies carefully, making sure they had enough food and water. He insisted on carrying part of the load, wanting to show that he was capable. She allowed it, though she kept the heavier items for herself. Before leaving, he stood in the doorway of the shelter and looked around quietly. The small stone room had become more than a temporary refuge. It held memories of laughter, healing, and the beginning of something meaningful between them. He felt grateful for it, for her, and for the chance to step forward again. The journey began slowly. Snow crunched beneath their feet, and cold air filled their lungs with each breath. The sun reflected brightly off the snow, forcing them to shield their eyes. She walked slightly ahead, guiding the path, while he followed carefully, using the walking stick for balance. At first, the walk felt easier than expected. He moved steadily, enjoying the feeling of fresh air and open space. They spoke occasionally, sharing small observations about the land around them. Animal tracks, the shape of distant peaks, the sound of melting ice in hidden streams. But after some time, his steps grew slower. She noticed the change immediately but said nothing, allowing him to continue at his own pace. When he paused to rest, she stopped beside him without drawing attention to his fatigue. "Just catching my breath," he said, smiling lightly. She nodded, offering water. They continued like this for hours, moving forward in small, steady steps. The mountain seemed endless, yet she knew the path well enough to keep them on course. As afternoon approached, clouds began to gather lightly in the distance, though the weather remained calm. He tried to ignore the growing heaviness in his chest, telling himself it was only weakness from days of injury. Still, each breath required more effort. They reached a ridge where the view opened wide, revealing a valley far below. In the distance, faint shapes marked the direction of the town. Seeing it filled him with hope. "We're close," he said, relief in his voice. She followed his gaze and nodded. "Yes. But we must keep moving slowly," he agreed, though determination pushed him to walk faster. After a short while, pain forced him to stop again. This time he sat down heavily on a rock, breathing harder than before. Concern crossed her face. She knelt beside him. "We rest longer," she said gently. He hesitated but nodded. Sitting quietly together, they watched the sky change color as afternoon shifted toward evening. The world felt calm, yet she sensed urgency growing. After resting, they continued again. The path downward was more difficult, with hidden patches of ice that required careful steps. She stayed close, ready to support him whenever needed. As twilight approached, his condition worsened. His breathing became uneven, and his movements lost coordination. He tried to hide it, but she saw everything. Fear moved quietly within her, though she kept her voice calm. "We stop here," she said firmly. When he stumbled again, he shook his head slightly. "No, we're almost there." Her eyes softened, but remained strong. "You need rest." He looked at her, wanting to argue, but exhaustion overcame his pride. They settled beneath a group of trees, sheltered from wind. She built a small fire quickly, using dry branches she had collected along the way. As the fire grew, he leaned back against a tree, closing his eyes briefly. She watched him closely, noticing how pale his face looked in the fading light. "You're not telling me something," she said quietly. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. For a moment he considered denying it, but honesty felt easier now. "The pain, it's deeper than I thought." She nodded slowly, already knowing. They sat together in silence for a while. The firelight moved gently between them, creating warmth against the cold evening air. He spoke again, his voice softer. "If I hadn't met you, I wouldn't be here at all." She looked at him, emotion visible in her eyes. "You are here because you chose to keep living." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But you gave me a reason." The words stayed between them, heavy with meaning. Night settled quietly around them, stars appearing slowly above the mountains. Though tired, she remained alert, ready to continue at first light. Inside her heart, she knew time was becoming more precious. The journey toward help had become more than a physical path. It had become a race against something unseen. Still, she held on to hope. Each step forward carried the possibility of saving him completely. And as long as hope remained, she would keep walking beside him, guiding him toward the future they both silently wished to reach. The first light of dawn broke slowly across the valley, painting the snow with soft shades of gold and pink. The air was crisp, and the wind carried a gentle chill that made each breath sharp and clear. The cowboy stirred beside the small fire they had built the night before, his eyes opened slowly, searching for the familiar warmth of the woman who had saved him. She was already awake, checking the fire and surveying the path ahead, her face calm but alert. He tried to stand, testing his strength. Pain shot through his side, and his legs trembled, but he managed a few steps. She moved beside him immediately, steadying him with a gentle hand on his shoulder.
"Take it slow," she reminded him softly.
"We are close. We must reach the town before anything worsens." The path ahead was still challenging. Snow-covered uneven ground and hidden ice patches forced them to move carefully. Yet the sight of the distant settlement gave them determination. He pushed himself forward, each step heavier than the last, but hope drove him onward. She stayed beside him, supporting his weight and keeping his spirits calm. As they walked, they spoke quietly, sharing fragments of life that no storm could erase. He told her of lonely days on his ranch, of the quiet joy he had found in watching sunsets alone, and of the fear he sometimes felt when facing the harshness of nature. She listened, sharing her own experiences traveling alone through the mountains, explaining how she had learned to read the wind, the clouds, and the signs of the land to survive. Their words created a bond stronger than friendship, forged in the struggle to survive and the courage to care for one another. Hours passed. The town grew slightly larger in the distance, its structures faint shapes against the snow. But the closer they came, the slower the cowboy moved. His strength, though returned, was fading again under the stress of the journey. His breathing became shallow, and sweat formed along his brow despite the cold. She noticed immediately and did not hesitate. "We need to stop," she said firmly, though softly, kneeling to support him as he sank to the snow-covered ground. "You have gone as far as your body can take today."
He shook his head weakly.
"No. Almost there, I can make it." Her eyes softened, but her voice did not waver. "No. We wait here, just for a little while. The town will not leave us." He tried to protest but soon realized the truth in her words. He leaned against her as she built a small fire with snow-frozen branches she had gathered, keeping the flames alive despite the cold. The warmth was small but sufficient to ease his discomfort for a short while. As he rested, his thoughts drifted. He remembered the accident that had left him helpless and the moments of fear as the storm swallowed the mountain. But he also remembered the courage of the woman beside him, how she had not hesitated, how she had carried him through the snow, fed him, kept him warm, and reminded him to keep fighting. Gratitude and admiration filled his heart. "You saved me," he said finally, his voice weak but sincere. I don't know how to thank you." She smiled gently, brushing a strand of snow from his coat. "No thanks needed. You survived because you chose to keep moving. I only helped guide you." He shook his head, smiling faintly, despite the pain. "You gave me more than guidance. You gave me hope. Something I hadn't felt in years." They sat together as the sun climbed higher. The warmth of the fire and the growing light seemed to ease both their minds. But the cowboy's condition was deteriorating, and she could see it in the way he leaned heavily against her. His breathing became uneven, shallow, and labored. She held him closer, supporting him, whispering words of encouragement. "Stay with me," she said softly. "You are almost safe. Just hold on a little longer." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of trust, gratitude, and something deeper he could not express.
I'm trying," he said, his voice barely audible.
Step by step, she helped him stand again. They moved slowly, almost crawling in places, through the last stretch of snow-covered land toward the edge of the town. Every movement required effort and care. She guided him around icy patches, helped him over fallen branches, and kept him balanced whenever he faltered. As they neared the first buildings, hope filled both their hearts. The sight of people, of doors and chimneys, promised warmth, food, and safety. He tried to lift his spirits with the thought that the worst was over, but despite his determination, his body was weakening faster than he realized. Near the edge of the town, his legs buckled. She caught him immediately, holding him in her arms, her strength steadying his failing body. He gasped for air, eyes wide with fear that he could not speak. She whispered calming words, pressing her hand against his chest to steady him, urging him to breathe slowly. The townspeople saw them from a distance and ran to help. She allowed them to take over, guiding her weight around him, ensuring he was supported but refusing to let go. For a brief moment, the struggle between hope and reality felt endless. Despite all the effort, despite her unwavering courage, his strength failed completely. He collapsed gently against her, too weak to resist. She held him tightly, speaking to him softly, her voice steady despite the growing fear in her heart. "You made it," she whispered. "You are safe now. Please, stay with me." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting trust, gratitude, and something that went beyond words. For a moment it seemed as if he might pull through, but the quiet finality of the mountains, the storm, and the journey claimed him. His hand relaxed in hers, and his breath grew still. She remained there, holding him, refusing to let go even as grief filled the air around them. Tears fell freely, but she stayed strong, knowing that the courage she had shown in saving him until this moment was still a victory. She had carried him through the storm, guided him through the snow, and given him every chance at life that circumstances would allow. Hours later, she finally allowed herself to stand, her hands resting on his shoulders. The townspeople offered blankets and comfort, but she felt the emptiness that comes when someone important is lost despite every effort. She whispered softly to the snow and the mountains, honoring the bond they had shared. The memory of their journey would remain with her forever. The long walks through snow, the nights by firelight, the quiet conversations, and the trust they had built in impossible circumstances. She understood that love and courage were not always measured by time spent together, but by the depth of care and the determination to stand by another person until the very end. When the town finally carried him to safety, she returned to the mountains alone. Her steps were heavier now, but her heart was stronger. The journey had changed her, as it had changed him, even in the brief time they had shared. The story of survival, courage, and unspoken connection lived within her as she walked beneath the endless sky, carrying his memory like a flame that would never fade. Though she had lost him, she also knew that their story, the struggle, the hope, and the bond, would remain part of her life forever. The snow-covered mountains, the quiet valleys, and the winter storm that had first brought them together would forever hold the memory of the cowboy and the Apache woman, two lives intertwined by fate, courage, and the unyielding will to save another.